Get your tickets from the Berry Partnership's website and Facebook pages. For more information about the Berry Partnership, email director@theberrypartnership.com and follow us on Facebook and Instagram to stay up to date with all things happening here in Berry. Recycled Percussion is coming to the Berry Auditorium Saturday, April 1st. Showtime 7 p.m. Get your tickets now.
The Brady Farkas Show is produced and funded by WDEV and the Radio Vermont Group. We welcome listener feedback. Email your comments to wdev@radiovermont.com.
The energy. So the barber trims my beard all nice, like an artist. Now, I didn't tell him to do that. I wanted the beard gone. So then I went home and shaved it off completely after I was done. I felt horrible. The passion. Rafael Devers is the biggest contract in franchise history. He needs to be a leader for this Red Sox team. The opinions on all your favorite teams. Are the Patriots close to playoff contention? Yes. Are they close to Super Bowl contention? Hell no. This is the Brady Farkas Show on WDEV AM, FM, and WDEVradio.com. What's up, everybody? Welcome in. Brady Farkas Show here on WDEV AM and FM and WDEVradio.com. We got a lot to get to. Let's waste no time doing it. Jay Nichols from the VPA is going to call in about 15 minutes. Ryan Schneider, the associate head coach for the UVM men's basketball team, is going to be with us about 6:25, getting ready for the America East semifinal. Napa Morrisville, Napa Waterbury text line is open, 802-585-3026. Your locally owned Napa stores in Waterbury and Morrisville.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And here we go.
The show is brought to you by Fecto Homes. The opening thoughts are brought to you by Sticks and Stuff and Swanton Lumber. They're online at sticksandstuff.com. We're racing into the intro because there's a ton to get to, and I got a lot of comments already that I want to read. Yesterday evening, late, I started a firestorm on social media about high school sports. Let me just set the stage before we get into the conversation. So Rice advanced to the Division I boys basketball state title game. They beat Brattleboro yesterday. I sent out a tweet essentially saying that Rice, which is a private school, should not be playing in a tournament against public schools. That is essentially what I said. And I got a ton of reaction to that on all sides of the argument, right? People who hate private schools loved what I had to say. People who loved private schools or love private schools, they can't stand what I have to say. I will say this. Over the last 24 hours, I've read a lot of tweets. I've taken a lot of input. I've gotten some people on. I've gotten one very interesting phone call. In the last 24 hours, I have amended my position to this, and this is very, very important. High school sports in the state of Vermont is not fair. It is not fair the way high school sports are done in the state of Vermont, and it is not fair in several ways. And frankly, I don't know if there is a way to fix it. I know what my perfect version of high school sports looks like, and Vermont doesn't have it. And I don't know that based on the size of the state, I don't know that Vermont can ever get it. And that's just the sad reality. I am sorry that I'm telling you there is a problem, and I do not come to you with a solution. I do not have some great plan to fix this, but I absolutely can have the conversation with you about what I am feeling. And based on the 100 tweets alone that I got about this topic, I know there are people out there that are passionate about this as well. High school sports in the state of Vermont just simply isn't fair. Let me start with the gripe that got this whole thing started. I have a huge problem anywhere with private schools playing against public schools for state championships. I have a huge problem with that. I always have. I always will. I've said it a zillion times. I've been on 3 different radio stations. I have done this segment on all 3 of them. It is one thing, as far as I'm concerned, for a private school to have a player that could have or should have been on a public school roster. It is another thing for that private school to beat that public school in some capacity with a player or two or three that could have or should have been on their roster. I find that to be completely unfair. I have absolutely zero problem with private schools playing against public schools in the regular season. I have absolutely zero problem with private schools and public schools being in the same league. I have only a problem with state championship tournaments in which private schools compete against public schools by using the players who could have and should have gone to those public schools. I am not here to call private schools dirty. Sometimes they are, but I'm not here to call private schools dirty. I'm not here to call private schools in Vermont dirty. Sometimes private schools poach kids wrongly off of public school rosters. That happens. And sometimes public school kids just choose to go to private schools for any number of reasons that they would want to. I have no problem with private schools existing, and I have no problem with kids going to private schools. But I have a problem when a private school competes against a public school in the state tournament and beats the public school with the players that could have and should have been on their roster. And I also have a problem when kids at public schools are denied championships because they are playing against assembled private school all-star teams. That is just how I feel. I have felt that way forever. I will continue to feel that way. I grew up. I went to a public high school. The shortstop at Christian Brothers Academy in Albany should have been playing for us, and we would have been much better if he was. That bothered me. I played at a public high school. We lost in the sectional semifinals to Christian Brothers Academy, which didn't have any of our talent, but essentially was an assembled all-star team. 2 kids that should have been playing at Shaker High School, 2 kids that should have been playing at Albany High School. Instead, they were all playing at Christian Brothers Academy. They were an all-star team, and they beat us, and that bothered me too. So that is where my initial foundational thought comes from. When I was a jealous 17-year-old, and 15, 16 years later, I have never let it go. And it's worse in New York. It's called the New York State Public High School Athletic Association title, but yet private schools can win it. That has always bothered me. So yes, anytime that I see Rice in a state title game in any sport, I sit here and wonder, who did they beat along the way that could have been having their players on their roster? Who got denied a state title because they were beaten by a Rice team that had kids that should have been playing for them? I cannot help it. Every time I see Rice in a title game, that is my first thought. However, for a long time, I only ever had that view. I only ever got mad at private schools. That was my experience. But after the last few years of living here, and after the last 24 hours of being more educated on this stuff, I have learned that in the state of Vermont, private schools are not the only problem. What I just outlined is a problem. The state of Vermont, though, has multiple other problems that make the landscape unfair. So if you're out here thinking I'm just a private school hater, I am not. I am here to tell you the whole system appears to be broken. These half public, half private boarding schools in the state, these are an issue too. Linden Institute, St. Johnsbury Academy, Burr & Burton. Yes, they have town players on their team. They also can go and recruit from all over the state. They could also bring in kids from other states. And heck, if they really wanted to get crazy, they could bring in kids from anywhere in the world. I don't know if they would actually do that, but it certainly is possible. I am against those schools competing against public schools as well. So those schools that have local kids but can bring in kids from the outside, that bothers me too. Even though there's a public school component, I'm not a huge fan of it. And then finally, I've been reminded about something called school choice as well. This is a problem. Also, this is another thing in the state that is not fair. Now, Academic, I'm not here to I don't have an idea on school choice and, should you get rid of it? I'm not saying that, but it does contribute to an unequal playing field athletically, does it not? I got a phone call today and I was told about multiple kids on public school teams that should have been playing for other public schools, but instead they are playing for that school, right? This is just a hypothetical example. A kid who should go to Burlington who's starting at CVU. A kid who should go to South Burlington who's starting at Mount Mansfield. A kid who should go to Mount Mansfield starting at Montpelier. Kids are leaving public schools to go to other public schools, and that also is a problem. Okay? I feel bad for kids that are up against an uneven playing field. And that uneven playing field apparently comes from multiple different directions. It comes from the private school that poaches a public school talent. It comes from a public school that poaches a public school talent. It comes from a kid who just chooses to leave a public school town to go to another public school town, oftentimes, I'm sure, to better their sports standing. And these half public, half private institutions are also problems as well. None of this is fair. I don't have a great idea on how to fix it. Like in my perfect world, you live in a district, you go to that public school. And if you don't go to that public school, you go to a private school. And then the private schools all get weeded out into their own playoffs. In my world, that's the perfect scenario. That probably can't exist in Vermont, given how small the state is. I don't know what you would do, right? If you take Rice and St. J and Linden out of the playoffs, what do they have? Their own little mini round robin, and that's it. And then the rest of the tournament field is watered down. That's no great shakes. Are we putting all the private schools around the state together so then some Division IV school like Mid-Vermont Christian gets to go up against Rice and get blasted by 75? That's probably not great either. How do we set up a regional tournament where Rice and St. J get to go play other schools like them around New England? I have no idea. But what I have learned is that this is an unfair operating scenario for kids around the state, right? In my perfect world, kids play in a town system. They grow up. Their talent gets cultivated in the town. They represent their local high school, and it's great. It's the Friday Night Lights type romanticism stuff that we've all seen and been told about for years. And if you're not going to do that, you go play at a private school, and then you go play somewhere else in the playoffs. In Vermont, that's not the case, and it's not the case on multiple levels. The private schools play the public schools in the playoffs. That's not fair. School choice allows kids to leave their district to go play somewhere else. That's not fair. And the kids who get screwed are just that, kids who get screwed. Kids who miss out on a chance to win a championship because somebody left their school and went somewhere else and had to play against them. All of this bothers me. Okay? All of this bothers me. Now, Ray, who's in New York, says, I agree 100% about private schools. Jesse in Pittsfield, private schools should not be allowed to compete in Vermont state championships. Tex says, we used to compete against Burke Mountain Academy, against future Olympians, and I played at Division IV Cabot, excuse me. Tex says, Brady, this has been a debate for years. Some kids go to Rice for a discount. Me and my high school friends have lived this. This is an unfair advantage. You can throw in St. J and Burton. And private school kids, some of them are not even religious. Should that be a prerequisite? I would say yes, but we know that it's not at some of these private schools. Again, I'm not here to bag just on Rice. Initially, my foundational view was just against private schools. 7 years ago when I got here, I would have just been against Rice. Now I'm kind of against the whole system because none of this seems to be fair. Now, some of you on the text line are responding and saying, this is only a basketball problem. What does it matter? Doesn't matter to me. Like if it affects one sport, it matters. So if a private school doesn't dominate soccer but dominates basketball, it's still a big deal to me. Some of you say that I'm just a private school hater. Not true. I started out as a private school hater, but I've evolved my way of thinking into just this. Some of you are saying you completely agree with me. Thank you. Tex says, Basically, I'm making this story up. This is not New York. Ease up on Rice. Public school parents send kids there for a reason. Think of the kids. I have nothing against the school's right to exist. If you want to go to Rice or any private school because you think the academics are better, do it. If you want to go to Rice because you think the athletics are better, do it. If you want to go to Rice because your family goes to Rice, do it. If you want to go to Rice because the facilities are better, do it. I just don't think you should be allowed to play in the tournament against public school kids, some of which you have taken the talent from or had the talent given to you from. I don't think that that's fair. This is not college in the transfer portal where a kid who was at UVM one year can just go to UMass Lowell the next year and play against it. That to me is not right. But we got somebody calling in who's going to know this way better than me and who has opinions as well. Let's go out to the phone line now and bring on Jay Nichols. He is the executive director of the Vermont Principals Association. I believe he's been listening into this conversation. Jay, thank you for being with us. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I am well as well. I guess I will just ask, if you have been listening to what I just said, what is your blanket reaction?
Well, my blanket reaction actually has several points that I'll make related to this. A lot of what you're saying, on a personal level, I agree with. However, in Vermont, one of the issues is that we're so small that to have two separate systems wouldn't work. And you're right that there are some inherent inequities built into our system. And a lot of that is through hundreds of years of history, and it's not really sports specific, although sometimes it manifests itself in the sports world. In Vermont, we've always had a number of towns that are school choice towns. So schools have always recruited for kids to go to those schools. So whether it's a private school recruiting for them or other public schools, that's always been a facet of Vermont because our schools and our school systems are so small. So I think those are variables that are really really have to be realized in Vermont. And that's why, it would be too hard and practical to have two different state champions. Some states have like a Catholic league or private league champions, and then they have a public school champion. Some cities do that as well. We get 81,000. We're talking kindergarten through 12th grade, so we really don't have the numbers to do anything like that. Basically, what we can try to do is to regulate so that when kids are enrolled in a school, they're all playing by the same rules. We don't really have a lot of control over the enrollment too. And schools like Rice do recruit kids. That's part of how they get kids to come to their school. And they're not doing anything illegal by that. Well, what would be illegal would be if they went to a kid and said, hey, if you come here, you're going to be our starting point guard. They don't have the right to do that. But they do have the right to say, hey, come here. We have a real good education. If you're Catholic or religious, we'd like to have you come here. And hey, you play basketball too. We get a good basketball program. I'd love to have you try out play. They have the right to do that. So there's no clear-cut answer. And the BPA just tries to oversee all sports as best it can in Vermont.
So I want to make clear my point to everybody again that this started out as me on a rant 5 years ago, 7 years ago, 15 years ago against just private schools. Now I think, based on what I've learned about Vermont, that the whole state has inequities, and Jay has just considered that as well and agreed with me on that. So I appreciate that. I guess here's one thing I wonder. I hear public school people, of which I was one, it lumped in, often complain about what I've complained about. But then my question is, do you ever hear, do public schools want the Rices of the world taken out, or do they not want their tournament field watered down if you took out 3 or 4 schools?
Well, I think it depends on who you ask. It's not a universal blanket rule. We've had conversations at the BPA leadership level in the past, and I'm sure they did before I was here, about whether or not private schools should be part of it. And I think the answers always come back to that because of the small number of teams and schools we have, and because of the closeness of kids between private schools and public schools, that to do that would hurt a lot of kids. And so what we've tried to do instead is have a set of rules that are the same for everybody once a kid's enrolled in school, make sure everybody follows those rules, and if they don't, take action against them, and then go from there. Do we have members occasionally that say, we shouldn't have a private academy that has boarding students, or that we shouldn't have, somebody mentioned, I think, Burke Mountain. Yeah, we do get those complaints occasionally. And so far, unless we had a core number of membership that wanted to go in a different direction, so far it's been, we're going to try to include everybody and just ask them to play by the same rules once the kid's enrolled.
Is this mainly just a basketball issue? Because whenever I bring this up, it's always around this time of year, and somebody tells me this doesn't happen in other sports. The private schools don't dominate the other sports. This is just a basketball issue, and because it's just a basketball issue, Brady are making way too much of it. Is that how you see this? Is this only a conversation in basketball and not other sports?
I think it's a conversation in other sports sometimes. I think the difference is, with basketball, the influence you have, the influence one player has is so much greater than other sports, unless maybe you're a pitcher in baseball.
Yep.
And it's also, we also hear some complaints about this in hockey as well. Those are the two sports we tend to hear it the most in, for sure, basketball and hockey.
Jay Nichols, the executive director of the Vermont Principals Association, with us here on the Brady Farkas Show on WDEV, AM and FM, and WDEVradio.com. One thing I have wondered is, and I don't know fully how it would be administrated, but, at least most of the years that I've been here, Rice is Division I in basketball, but Division II in football. And some of the other private schools are playing down a level in one sport, but up a level in another. Is there ever a thought to making these private schools play at the highest classification level possible so that, they might have good players, that anybody who's a private school and can recruit should have to play in Division I?
I don't think there's really been a lot of conversation about that, but the specialized academies like ski schools and stuff like that, they are all Division II.
Yep.
And that was a decision that the DPA committees made way before my time, so it's been that way for quite a while. In terms of Rice, they usually petition up. They ask to play Division I in basketball. They in terms of the number of kids they had, if you just went by the number of male athletes, they'd probably be a Division II school. So they asked to go up to the highest level. And there are other schools that do that, not just, also some public schools that will do that. They'll just say, we want to play Division I. We've always played Division I. We think we're competitive there. And schools can petition up as long as we have another school that's willing to, play down, so to speak. The way it's done in what we call the traditional team sports, basketball, baseball, softball, soccer, it goes by the number of students you have in that gender. And then the number of schools we have overall, we try to balance out the divisions. So there's, 16 teams or so in each division to help us be able to have a complete tournament. In some other states, obviously, there's a lot of teams that don't make the tournament. You have to win a certain number of games or whatever. But we're so small now that anybody can be in the tournament.
How do other states handle this debate? Because I'm sure there are other small or sparsely populated states, New Hampshire, Maine, et cetera. How do they handle things?
Well, New Hampshire and Maine have a lot more kids than we do. It's not even close. The only state that's close to us is Wyoming.
Really?
In terms of number of people. Yeah, Vermont is, we have the oldest population in the United States, probably close to Maine. And then in terms of number of students, only Wyoming competes with us for how small we are. You look at the few cities that are in Maine and New Hampshire and just put those cities all together, and they're closing in on 80,000 kids just there. So it's a real unique issue to Vermont. In bigger states, there are, as I mentioned before, sometimes they have private schools be part of public school system, and sometimes they have private schools broken out. And I don't think there's any set way that it's done in any place in the country. I think it's done state by state.
Jay, let me ask you a question off of this topic. It's just something I have wondered. I know, and in fairness, we didn't really see it this year. We saw it more last year, but I have wondered if, kind of the point you just made, not everyone should make the playoffs, and so you would avoid a 1 versus a 16 hockey matchup where the final score is 15-0, or a 1-16 basketball matchup where the final score is 97-14. And I wondered if, instead of letting everybody in, has there ever been thought to doing the top 12 make it, and then 13 through 16 can have their own thing at the end of the year, so nobody's getting blasted by 85. Has that ever been a consideration?
They used to do something like that in football, where they would have the teams with the lowest records would play each other, and they had a nickname for it. I can't remember what it was now. And that was something was still going when I took over the VP as the executive director. In the other sports, there used to be a rule about you had to win a certain percentage of games, and I think when I coached it was you had to win 40% to qualify for playoffs. But then Vermont had, a number of schools go away with the declining enrollment. Late 1990s, early 2000s, we had about 125,000 kids, and now we get 81,000 kids. So, a lot of schools, quite a few schools have closed. A lot of schools have less numbers now. So the thought was several years ago to say, we're going to let everybody come in if they want to. Now, if you're a 16 seed and you don't want to play the 1 seed, you're not required to go into the playoffs. You can just, and many times teams will say, we're not going to. But sometimes, a 16 will upset a 1. It does happen. Occasionally.
Talk to me finally about school choice, kind of back to our original discussion, because this is something I'd never really heard of until I got to Vermont, and something I kind of underestimated the impact of. We focus so much on private schools getting public school talent, but school choice allows public schools to get public school talent. How does that impact the competitive landscape?
Well, it really does, especially in a sport like basketball, and it probably impacts basketball more than any other sport because a lot of schools don't have hockey. Usually you got to be a bigger school to be able to have hockey for the most part. So in basketball, as we talked about before, if you've got, I live in the town of Berkshire. There's 2 high schools near here, Richford and Enosburg, and 95% of the kids go to one or the other. If you're a real good basketball player from Berkshire and you get a couple of friends with you that are real good players and they all happen to go one way or the other, it really makes a difference for that program. Now, if those kids all decide one of their dads works or moms works in St. Albans, and they all go play for BFA St. Albans, well, that's a huge, win for BFA St. Albans. And BFA St. Albans and Enosburg and Richford and any other school can come to the school and say, come to our school. Here's the great programs that we offer. Because Berkshire is one of those 90 or so towns that doesn't have a high school, and therefore tuitions their kids. So it's perfectly appropriate to recruit those kids. What they can't do is the basketball coach can't come to the school and say, hey, Jay, you're a real good 3-point shooter. If you come here, I promise you'll be my number 2 guy in the next 4 years. If he does that and we can prove that occurred, then the coach could be barred from coaching and the school could have sanctions.
What?
From the DPA.
So you mentioned there, school choice if your town doesn't have a high school. What if your town does have a high school? What if you live in Essex?
Well, then there's a law in Vermont called Act 125, and that law was passed, I think it was 2012, but don't 100% quote me on that. I was still superintendent. And what it did was it allowed kids to sign up. If say I went to, we'll use Chittenden County. Say I went to Champlain Valley Union, CBU.
Yeah.
And I wanted to go to Burlington. I could, in the spring, I could sign a thing saying, even though I'm supposed to go to CBU because I live in one of their towns, say Heinsberg, I want to go to Burlington. I could fill out paperwork. And Burlington has control over the number of kids they will allow in under that provision. The difference with Act 125 is the money doesn't follow the kid. So a kid from Berkshire, if they go from Berkshire to another high school, the town of Berkshire is going to pay that kid's tuition to that high school because they're still a Berkshire resident. If I go from CVU to Burlington, and under Act 125, the money doesn't follow the kid. Now, some of those schools have agreements where the money does, but just in general with the law, the money doesn't follow the kid. So that CVU kid leaves Heinsberg, goes to Burlington. And Burlington's essentially educating that kid for nothing. And CVU is still getting the money for that kid because they still get what's called they get an equalized pupil amount for every kid. It gets complicated. The Vermont financing system's a little bit complicated, but the bottom line is that if I choose to go to another school and there's room for me, I can do that. And I can do that for whatever reason I want, essentially. I'm not supposed to be doing it for sports, but if I'm a 9th grader and I'm like, I really want to play baseball for Coach Smith instead of Coach Jones, I fill that paperwork out and I become a student at that school and I make the team. That's how it works. And we're such a small state, the state grew up without high schools for the most part. In the 70s and 80s, Vermont had more union high schools and stuff. But for a long time, Vermont had a lot of K-12 schools and a lot of little tiny town high schools. And the decision was made that those weren't practical financially and also didn't give kids enough programming. You couldn't really offer all the classes you wanted to offer at the high school level if you had a high school with 20 kids. So those schools became elementary schools and people started going to high schools like Missisquoi Valley Union, Harwood Union, Champlain Valley Union, those union high schools that had students from a number of towns.
Before the pitchforks come out at me, I'm not saying this happens in Vermont. I'm just a story here about my experience in New York. I will not use any names of schools or players, but there was a kid who was a very good basketball player, spent his 8th grade year at a public high school, played on the JV team, went to a private high school his 9th grade year, and then played on the varsity team. And then his 10th grade year went to a different private high school. The last private high school paid his back tuition to his old private high school and his new tuition, gave him a scholarship to his new private high school. And I found that to be very dirty. And that also helped color my opinions a long time ago of the whole private school debate. Again, I'm not saying that's happening here. I'm just saying that is where some of my initial basis of thought comes from angry 17-year-old Brady.
Yeah, and I get that from angry 17-year-old Brady, and there is some worry to, not something to that extreme necessarily happening in Vermont, but one of the things that concerns many of us with private schools is they don't have the same amount of accountability and transparency.
Yep.
They don't have to open their books to the public. They often can get taxpayer dollars. Now under the law, kids can go to those schools and taxpayer dollars pay for it, but we don't get any control over the governance of the school or anything like that. Whereas in a public school, you get elected school board member, you can see the budget, you can see exactly what they're spending things on. So that's definitely a legitimate concern, and the legislature has been struggling with that. I'm not sure how they're going to try to resolve that issue, but that's a legitimate concern. There's no question about that.
Jay Nichols, Executive Director of the VPA. Jay, thank you. A lot of people on the text line appreciate your perspective and you coming on, and I do as well. Thank you.
Anytime. Let us know. If we can help, we will.
All right. There goes Jay Nichols from the VPA. Let's get to CBS News.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by Steel.
I'm Monica Ricks in New York. The State Department confirms a tragic outcome for 2 Americans kidnapped last week in Mexico. CBS's Christian Benavides has details.
Mexican authorities announced 2 of the 4 Americans kidnapped last week were found dead.
Hay cooperación. Estamos trabajando.
Mexico's president expressed his condolences and says 1 person has been detained in connection with the abductions.
The 2 surviving Americans are back home. The Justice Department suing to block JetBlue from merging with Spirit Airlines. CBS's Steve Dorsey has details.
The Justice Department says the $3.8 billion purchase would reduce competition in the skies. Attorney General Merrick Garland.
We allege that if allowed to proceed, this merger will limit choices and drive up ticket prices for passengers across the country.
Garland says it would drive up prices, especially for cost-conscious travelers who pay their own way and don't fly on their employer's dime.
The Federal Reserve could increase its interest rate soon to higher levels than expected. Fed Chair Jerome Powell.
If a totality of the data were to indicate that faster tightening is warranted, we'd be prepared to increase the pace of rate hikes.
The Fed raised interest rates 7 times last year to fight inflation. More high school athletes are getting injured.
Nearly 8 million high school students take part in sports every year. The sport with the highest injury rate, not a surprise.
That's Elijah Cunningham, the tight end.
Football, followed by girls soccer and boys wrestling. Head and face injuries, which include concussions, are the most common. After that, ankle and knee injuries. And the severity of injuries is also on the rise. Steve Futterman, CBS News.
Californians are still dealing with complications from record snow as rainstorms start moving in. Fresno County Sheriff's Lieutenant Purcell.
The warning is basically letting people know that there is a potential that we are going to have to evacuate at some point, and we want to give people as much advance notice as we could. So those that live in the mountains, you can start to prepare for what you'll need.
The National Weather Service warns these storms could cause dangerous flooding. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin made a surprise visit to Iraq today. CBS's Kimmy McCormick.
He's the senior-most official in the Biden administration to visit Iraq, and his trip comes ahead of the 20th anniversary of the U.S.-led invasion there. And Austin said the U.S. is committed to keeping its military presence there.
The U.S. forces are ready to remain in Iraq at the invitation of the government of Iraq to support the Iraqi-led fight against terrorism.
And he insists this is not a combat mission, just an advise and assist mission to fight ISIS. This is CBS News.
Nobody should have to pay for one-size-fits-all insurance coverage. Liberty Mutual customizes your car and home insurance so you only pay for what you need. Liberty Mutual Insurance.
Your chance to be part of the show is on the text line at 802-585-3026.
Now it's back to the Brady Farkas Show on WDEV AM, FM, and WDEVradio.com.
Welcome back in. Brady Farkas Show here on WDEV, presented by Fecto Homes here on WDEV AM and FM and WDEVradio.com. Ryan Schneider, the UVM men's basketball associate head coach, is going to be with us in about 20 minutes. Catamounts getting ready tonight for the America East semifinals at Patrick Gym, taking on Binghamton. I am going to be at that game after the show ends. I want to thank Jay Nichols, the executive director of the VPA, for coming on. And here's my bottom line takeaway. None of what I said in segment one was wrong. The VPA just told us that the issues, Brady, that you feel are valid. The issues you feel are real. Now, they also believe that they can't really be fixed, which very well might be true. But that doesn't mean that they're not issues. They are concerned about private schools having a built-in advantage to recruit players. They are concerned that school choice creates an uneven playing field. They are aware that a kid who's supposed to go to CVU could end up at Burlington, and a kid who's supposed to go to Middlebury could end up at Harwood, whatever. They know that this happens. They're aware that this happens, and they're aware that this creates an unfair atmosphere for high school sports. And that's really what I was trying to prove. The state of Vermont does not have an equal playing field. The state of Vermont does not have an idealistic high school setup, and it might also not be able to be fixed. A long time ago, I thought it could be fixed. Just put Rice in a different place. Heck, even yesterday I tweeted out, put Rice in a regional playoff. Just get him out of the state. Maybe that can't happen. Maybe all of you that have told me that are right. But it doesn't mean that the issues that I think are issues are not issues. They are. The VPA just told you that. Peter in Williston, the Jay Nichols interview was top-notch, Brady. Good work, sir. Thank you. Other texter says the private schools don't always win. This is a nothing burger. And, well, I beg to differ. I beg to differ. And, look, you'll be saying it's an issue when you notice it more, right? If Rice wins the state title against CVU, I'll be wondering, who does Rice have that should have been playing at any other school? And heck, if CVU wins, I'll now be wondering, well, did everybody who goes to CVU actually live in the district, or are they bringing in ringers too? I mean, this is now what we're asking ourselves around the state. And look, man, Owen Kellington is a great story, right? Owen Kellington is a great story. Grew up in Central Vermont, played for those teams, cultivated his talent in those areas, went to U32, and then got drafted. That is a great story. Kid who grows up in a small area, trains in a small area, plays with the same friends growing up, gets his talent cultivated in that area. That's a great story. And then stars for the high school and takes him to a state title. You know what's not a great story? Kid who goes to the next town over just for sports and plays as a ringer. That's not a great story, and that's what I don't love. Text says, this is Joe in Essex. You are spot on. The problem can be fixed when penalties for recruiting are implemented with force, and that's fair too. Now, again, I don't know how you bust someone for recruiting, but we know that it happens. And when Jay says, oh, a school can say, hey, we come to our school, we have great programs, but they can't say you'll be our starting point guard. You and I both know they do say that. You and I know that. I guarantee you that private schools in this state go to public school kids and say, hey, come to our school, you'll be our starting point guard. Hey, come to our school, you'll be our starting left winger. Hey, come to our school, we got a spot for you in the rotation. I guarantee you that happens. I also guarantee you, because of school choice and Act 129 or whatever, that public schools say the exact same thing. Now, I don't know how you find them. I don't know if there's a paper trail on that. I know that they do it because you know they do it because you live and breathe. And I promise you the VPA knows that they do it. How do you stop it? That nobody knows. Unless there's an email or a text chain that somebody has access to, you're not going to catch them. But you know it happens. And if you find out it happens, then yeah, they should be suspended from the playoffs like a college would, put on probation. You love your high school that much, you'll stick it out. Good work, Brady, on this. Lived this in the 80s. We competed against Rice in football, basketball, and baseball. Beat them in football and baseball, but not b-ball. It was always a topic with friends, family, and coaches. Text says you encourage informing. Who's going to inform? I mean, seriously. Like, let me ask you, this is a serious question. Right? If Joe Smith is the head coach at a private school and goes to Billy Jones and sends him an email, hey, Billy, come play for us. We got a spot for you at shortstop. Well, then guess what? That email is going to stay with Billy Jones's family, and no one else is going to know about it. And if Billy Jones's family shares it with somebody, most parents probably don't even know that that's illegal. And some parents are probably happy that Billy Jones is leaving because it gives their kid a chance to make the public school team. So, I mean, this is Texter says there's always a trail and others know. Well, you got to find the trail then. And you got to be willing to stand on it. And I don't know that everybody is. But my biggest takeaway from Jay Nichols is every issue that I raised is something the VPA is aware of and concerned about. And that right now is good enough for me, because a lot of people, not a lot of you on the text line, but a lot of people told me, oh, Brady, this is nothing. You're just jealous. Oh, you're a private school hater. You didn't go to a private school. You don't get it. Well, I kind of do. And the VPA says it also. But the VPA also has rightly said public school choice is an issue too. Act 125 or 129 or whatever, that's an issue too. So it's not just a private school thing, but it's there's inequities in the state. And that's the bottom line. And it's tough and it's unfair. And I wish that wasn't the case, but it is. Yeah, I started a firestorm on social media about that yesterday. I had people from all over the state weighing in. And you'd be interested to see, by the way, people who liked my tweet. Like, go and look at the people who liked my tweet and see who they are. Pretty interesting. It's the Brady Farkas Show on DEV, presented by Fecto Homes. Again, Ryan Schneider, UVM men's basketball associate head coach, with us here in about 15 minutes. Well, I'm on it. I got people telling me I hate private schools. I also got an interesting text here randomly on the show. Brady, I listened to the podcast of yesterday's show. I didn't realize you hated Mac Jones so much. I don't hate Mac Jones. I don't. But I do consider myself a Mac Jones truth teller. There is a very big difference between being a hater and being a truth teller. Here is what I consider to be the truth on Mac Jones. 1, I think Mac Jones is good, not great. And it's really hard to win a title with a good, not great quarterback in the NFL. Fact. 2, I think Mac Jones has good intangible skills, but not great physical skills. And in order to be elite, you need great physical skills. Do you have great feet? Are you incredibly fast? Do you have an elite arm? Do you have elite accuracy? Mac's pretty accurate, but beyond that, he doesn't have any of the real physical traits. He doesn't look like Josh Allen looks. He doesn't look like Joe Burrow looks. He doesn't move like Lamar Jackson moves or Justin Fields. He just doesn't. Good intangible skills, good up top, good with the playbook, good at the line of scrimmage. I'm for all of that. Good with his teammates. He does not have great and elite physical skills. 3, I don't think he's the long-term answer at quarterback for the Patriots, because I won't pay him the money that quarterbacks are getting. Daniel Jones just got $40 million a year from the New York Giants. $40 million for Daniel Jones, who going into last season had 50 touchdowns and 49 turnovers in his career. Daniel Jones got $40 million a year. The Giants will come to regret that. That will be an albatross contract. I cannot give Mac Jones the same thing. Does not mean that I do not like him. If Mac Jones wanted to be my quarterback for $8 million a year, I'd probably love it. 40, no thank you. Not now, not ever. And finally, the truth on Mac Jones. I believe you can win with him. But in order to win with a quarterback like this, as I said, it's really hard. You need a whole lot to go right for you, and that is really hard to assure. It is that simple for me. I do not hate Mac Jones. I'm just telling you the truth. He is good, not great, and there's plenty of good but not great quarterbacks in the NFL. Jared Goff, good, not great. Dak Prescott, good, not great. Jimmy Garoppolo, good, not great. Geno Smith, Tua Tagovailoa, Kirk Cousins, Matt Ryan back in the day. I think all of those quarterbacks are starters, just like I think Mac Jones is a starter, but I do not consider any of them to be great. I'm fine with them being the quarterback of my team, but I don't think I'm a championship level team very often with any of those guys, and I want the Patriots to be a championship level team. That simple. Now, I think you can win a Super Bowl with those guys. I saw Jared Goff get to one, get close. Jimmy Garoppolo got close. And maybe Mac Jones can get close also, but so much has to go right in order for that to happen. I just don't know that you can do it with Mac. Again, you can, but so much has to go right. It's very, very difficult. It's not impossible, but it's very, very difficult. You got to be able to put all the right pieces around Mac Jones. You got to stay relatively healthy. You got to play an easy schedule. You got to get a schedule that gives you a chance to be the number 1 seed, to get home field advantage. You got to have other teams succumb to injuries. You got to have all of that go right for you. Look at the Eagles this year. And Jalen Hurts, I think, is better than Mac Jones. Eagles had an easy schedule. Eagles got the banged up 49ers as all hell in the NFC title game. They had a clear path. First round bye. Aaron Rodgers wasn't there. Tom Brady wasn't there. The NFC was weaker in general. They got to play Daniel Jones in the playoffs. Like, the Eagles had a fairly easy run to the playoffs or to the Super Bowl. The Patriots got to have that kind of run also. Look at the Vikings. Right? The Vikings won, 13 games this year or 14 games? They got some breaks in their scheduling. Their division was down. They saw Miami without Tua. And then the minute to get to the playoffs, they folded like a cheap suit. So even when you have that stuff go right for you, if you have a good, not great quarterback, it's really, really difficult to go all the way. I mean, and I can't pay Mac Jones $40 million a year. If you're going to get $40 million a year, you have to be good enough to carry your team. And I don't think Mac Jones is. Now, Josh Allen, I believe, is. Patrick Mahomes, I believe, is. Joe Burrow, I believe, is. Justin Herbert, I think, can be. Trevor Lawrence looks like he probably is. For a long time, I thought Russell Wilson was. Aaron Rodgers was. Tom Brady was. Now, he wasn't making 40, but thought Tom Brady could carry a team if needed. I don't think Mac Jones can carry a team. He's a guy who's going to have to be carried. And again, if you're going to have to be carried, you got to set up everything nice around him. And I don't know that the Patriots can. You got to draft well. You got to free agent well. You got to spend well. I don't know that they can. It's very difficult. But I do not hate Mac Jones. And soon, once we get to free agency, I'm going to be talking about how the Patriots can help Mac Jones get the best out of himself, because this is their guy. I want to be proven wrong. I just don't know if I will. Texter says, going back to your private high school rant, where did Taylor Coppenrath go to school? Didn't he go to St. Johnsbury Academy? Am I right on that? He's from Barnet. Didn't he go to St. Johnsbury Academy? And yeah, he did. Okay, so that we graduated from there in 2001 or whatever. I mean, 2000. I mean, I don't know, number one, if St. Johnsbury Academy was the exact same then it is now, but I would say the same thing. That is a kid who went to a school, but I don't know that Barnet doesn't feed the St. Johnsbury Academy. Maybe he was part of the public high school portion. I have no idea. I got to get my geography a little bit better on that. But again, I think everything I said stands pretty well today. Speaking of Taylor Coppenrath, I'm probably going to see him tonight because he's probably going to be at the UVM men's basketball semifinal. I would imagine that he will be there. Catamounts getting ready to take on Binghamton. That game is going to begin at 7:00. I am going to be there after this show ends, probably get there around halftime. Ryan Schneider, the men's basketball associate head coach, going to make some time for us here, not that far from tip-off. He's going to be with us next on the Brady Farkas Show, presented by Fecto Homes, getting you ready for the America East semifinals. Good high school discussion today. Ryan Schneider going to be with us next on the Brady Farkas Show on WDEV, AM and FM, WDEVradio.com, and always streaming on the free, very, very free WDEV radio app. Ryan Schneider next. More text. Welcome, as always.
At Northfield Savings Bank, we celebrate the ways you work and why you work. To build a business, to make a brighter future, to do something